fellow officers. Comrade Mikhailovich, the state authorities and colleagues are ready to lead the headquarters of the armed forces at the meeting. Chief of the General Staff v. Fellow officers. Fellow officers. Dear comrades, today, as part of an expanded meeting of the Board of the Ministry of Defense, we will discuss the main results of the work for the 24th year, determine the tasks for strengthening the defense capability, and further development of the armed forces. I should immediately note that the outgoing year has become a landmark one, a landmark in achieving the goals of a special military operation. Thanks to the professionalism and courage of our soldiers, the heroic work of employees of defense enterprises, or the truly nationwide support of the Army fleet, the Russian troops firmly own the strategic initiative on the entire line of contact. 189 settlements have been liberated this year alone. I would like to sincerely thank our heroes, soldiers and officers who selflessly and steadfastly fight on the front line. The personnel of the Ministry of Defense, Rosgvardia, our special services, and other law enforcement agencies, who clearly perform all assigned tasks, no matter how complex they may be. They do not spare themselves, they do not spare their lives for the sake of victory, for the sake of the fatherland. It is our duty to always remember our comrades who died defending the motherland and our people, to surround their families and their children with constant care. I have already said many times, and I will repeat it again, their children are our children. We should never forget about it. I ask you to honor the memory of our fallen comrades with minutes and silence. Thank you. Dear participants, colleagues, today, the military-political situation in the world remains difficult and unstable. This is how the bloodshed in the Middle East does not stop, and the high conflict potential remains. In a number of other regions of the world, we see that the current US administration, almost the entire collective West, does not give up trying to maintain its global dominance, continues to impose its so-called rules on the world community, which at the same time they change over and over again, distorting the way it is convenient for them. But, strictly speaking, there is only one stable rule. There are no rules for those who do this, for those who consider themselves at the head of the whole world. Those who consider themselves representatives of the Lord on earth, although they do not believe in the Lord themselves. And hybrid wars are being waged against undesirable states. They are implementing a policy of deterrence, including against Russia. The desire to weaken our country, to inflict a strategic defeat on us. The United States continues to pump the virtually illegitimate ruling regime in Kiev with weapons and money. They send mercenaries and military advisors, and thereby encourage further escalation of the conflict. At the same time, under the pretext of a mythical Russian threat, they simply frighten their own population with the fact that we are going to attack someone. After all, the tactics are very simple. They bring us to the red line, through which we can no longer retreat. We begin to respond. They immediately frighten their population, back in the old days of the Soviet, now the Russian threat. Meanwhile, the NATO countries themselves are increasing military spending. Strike groups of alliance troops are being formed and put together near the Russian borders. So the number of American troops in Europe has already exceeded 100,000 people. NATO's aspirations have long gone beyond the so-called zone of its historical responsibility. In addition to the so-called Eastern flank, the alliance is increasing its presence in the Asia-Pacific region. At the instigation of the United States, new military-political alliances are being formed, which undermine the security architecture that has been in place for decades. Of no less concern is the activity of the United States in creating and preparing for deployment in advanced zones of high-precision ground-based strike weapons with a firing range of up to 5,500 kilometers. At the same time, the transfer and deployment of these missile systems in Europe and in the Asia-Pacific region are already being worked out. Let me remind you that earlier such measures were prohibited by the Treaty on the Elimination of Intermediate-Range and Shorter-Range Missiles, which, at the initiative of the United States, ceased to operate. We have repeatedly stated that the rupture of this treaty will lead to negative consequences for the entire global security. But we stressed at the same time that we will not deploy medium and shorter-range missiles until American weapons of this kind appear in any region of the world. In fact, Russia has assumed these obligations unilaterally. But, as I have already said, if the United States starts deploying such systems, then all our voluntary restrictions will be lifted by us. Given the growing geopolitical tensions, we are forced to take additional measures to ensure the security of Russia and our allies. We are doing this carefully, without getting involved in a full-scale arms race, to the detriment of the socio-economic development of our country. We pay serious attention to improving the combat strength of the armed forces, increasing their capabilities. As part of these tasks, the Leningrad and Moscow military districts, a number of new units and formations have been formed. The full-time strength of the armed forces has been increased to 1.5 million servicemen. The Fleet Army is being re-equipped with modern weapons and equipment at an accelerated pace. For example, the share of such weapons in the strategic nuclear forces has already amounted to 95%. At the same time, we clarified the basic principles of the use of nuclear weapons, which are set out in the updated fundamentals of state policy in the field of nuclear deterrence. And I want to emphasize once again that no one there accuses us of using nuclear weapons. This is a policy of nuclear deterrence. Along with the nuclear triad, general-purpose forces are developing rapidly. The troops are receiving advanced robotic systems, including those using artificial intelligence technologies. Among them are reconnaissance and attack drones, unmanned boats, and multi-purpose robotic platforms. Today, it is important to continue the progressive, systematic development of the Navy's Army, to achieve the goal of a special military operation, to be ready for an operational and effective response to potential security challenges of our country. At the same time, it is necessary to focus on solving the following priority tasks. The first one, of course, strategic nuclear forces remain one of the key instruments for maintaining stability and protecting Russia's sovereignty and territorial integrity. We will continue to support their potential and balanced development. You see the work on the creation of new systems and complexes of deterrence forces. Along with this, it is important to keep non-strategic nuclear forces on constant alert, and to continue the practice of conducting exercises with working out issues of their use. Second, I have already spoken today about the risks associated with the deployment of medium-range missiles by the United States in Europe and the Asia-Pacific region. We will respond to such threats in a comprehensive manner. At the same time, the most important task is to ensure timely detection of the launch of such missiles and their interception. At the same time, it is necessary to debug all issues of mass production and deployment of such domestic shock systems, including hypersonic ones. As you know, the latest powerful weapon of Russia has become the medium-range missile system Oreshnik. In November, in response to attacks on the territory of our country with the use of Western weapons, it was successfully used. A ballistic missile in a nuclear-free hypersonic equipment was used. Serial production of such complexes should be provided in the near future to protect the security of Russia and our allies. And it will certainly be done. The third task. It is necessary to actively implement the experience gained during a special military operation and in the combat training of troops, as well as in the programs of higher military educational institutions. At the same time, it is necessary to improve the methods of conducting military operations, clarify the fundamental statutory documents, increase the level of possession of weapons and equipment, as well as the effectiveness of command and control of troops, especially in tactical and operational tactical units. I would like to emphasize again that talented officers and sergeants who have proved themselves in difficult combat situations should form the basis of the command staff of the armed forces, as well as become teachers of military educational institutions. Fourth, the experience of conducting a special military operation should be fully taken into account when determining priority areas for the development of domestic weapons and equipment, tactics of their use. For example, in high-precision weapons systems, new methods of guidance are used at the final stage of the flight of missiles, which allowed them to be used on complex and fortified objects and to be used successfully. The noise immunity of the onboard equipment of missile weapons has been significantly increased. New ways of completing flight tasks have been worked out. In the future, you need to calculate them in real time according to the promptly identified goals. This is an extremely important task for our military-industrial complex, but I will say more about it. Another important innovation was the direct exchange of information between the units directly involved in the special operation and the defense industry organizations. That's what I just mentioned. As a result, for a number of products, the average time to eliminate the identified shortcomings is now 5 to 7 days. But even this is not enough. We need to go even faster. There are positive developments in the organization of repair of equipment, its fine-tuning, taking into account the requirements of the combat situation. But there are problems, of course, too. They remain. They need to be solved consistently. And, of course, we must continue to do everything necessary to accelerate the introduction of advanced technologies and other innovations in the military sphere. Fifth, in order to preserve the reduction of decision-making time when managing units on the battlefield, an interspecific information exchange system based on mobile devices has been created and has shown its effectiveness. The troops have already delivered over 6,500 such systems. As a result of their application, the time for setting tasks decreased by 1.5 to 2 times. Now, due to the introduction of advanced developments of the defense industry, it is necessary to form a single information circuit as soon as possible, combining means of reconnaissance and destruction at the strategic, operational, and tactical levels of management. Sixth, it is necessary to increase the production of robotic complexes and unmanned systems of various classes and types. At the beginning of the special operation, we had problems in this area. Some samples turned out to be expensive and difficult to operate. Today, several thousand drones of various purposes enter the troops every day. It is necessary to further improve their combat and operational characteristics. It is equally important to train operators of such complexes, to train them according to programs developed based on the experience of real combat operations. And seventh, we need to continue and further expand military and military technical cooperation with allies and partners, with those who are ready and willing to work with us, and this is the majority of countries in the world. Dear comrades, I have already spoken today about the huge support of the Army and Navy from the Russian society. People understand what we are fighting for, what we are defending, help the frontline soldiers, and join their ranks themselves. An extremely important thing that reflects the state of our society. I'll give you a figure. This year, on average, more than 1,000 people are entering military service under a contract every day. People voluntarily go to the front, and the social guarantees of servicemen and their families should be constantly strengthened and developed. This is the most important systemic task of the state. Yes, a lot has been done in this area in recent years. This year alone, over 55,000 servicemen have been provided with housing. And in the next 3 years, it is planned to allocate another 113 billion rubles for the provision of housing subsidies to military personnel. The accumulative mortgage system demonstrates high efficiency. Over 20 years of its operation, over 202,000 servicemen of the armed forces of the Russian Federation have been provided with housing. I will add that we need to continue to equip military camps, of course, to increase the level of medical support. The priority in the work of all authorities should be the solution of social issues of the participants of the special operation. Taking care of the families of the victims, as I said at the beginning, and those who were seriously injured during the fighting. This should be the focus of our attention. It is necessary to delve into the problems of each of our comrades and their families, and really help them solve their problems. This is the task of the Ministry of Defense, the task of the government in the Russian Federation, and all leaders at all levels of government. In conclusion, I would like to thank once again all the participants of the special military operation for their valor, courage and heroism, and wish the personnel and civilian personnel of the armed forces, the leadership of the Ministry of Defense, success in their service, in difficult responsible work aimed at protecting the sovereignty and national interests of Russia. The safety of our wound. I am sure that you will continue to adequately solve all the tasks assigned to you. Thank you for your attention. Comrade Supreme Commander-in-Chief, dear comrades, dear guests. This year, the armed forces of the Russian Federation have been solving the tasks set by the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, within the framework of a tough confrontation with the collective West, which continues to intensify and grow. In such circumstances, the activities of the Ministry of Defense are based on the following key factors. First of all, it is conducting active military operations during a special military operation, as well as performing certain tasks, and ensuring a military presence in the countries of Central Asia, Africa, the Caucasus, and Transnistria. Secondly, it is ensuring full readiness for any development of the situation in the medium term, including a possible military conflict with NATO in Europe in the coming decades. This is evidenced by the decisions that were taken at the North Atlantic Alliance Summit held in July this year. This is also reflected in the doctrinal documents of the United States and other NATO countries. The third factor is the rapid development of end-to-end technologies, such as artificial intelligence and big data processing, robotics, high-speed secure data transmission, machine-to-machine interaction, the so-called Internet of Things, quantum computing and communications. These technologies are radically changing the nature of armed struggle at all levels, tactical, operational, and strategic. In accordance with the instructions of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, in such conditions, the armed forces should become more flexible and receptive to innovations, including innovations in the civilian sector. The fourth factor is the capabilities of the Russian economy, primarily the budget, which must be taken into account when building the armed forces. Already today, the level of spending on national defense has reached 6.3% of GDP, 32.5% of the federal budget. This dictates strict requirements for the efficiency of our work. The President of the Russian Federation also paid special attention to this. Together, these four factors determine the priorities of the Ministry of Defense for the next year and the medium term. These are the 10 main areas in which it is necessary to achieve significant results next year. The first direction is to ensure victory in a special military operation to achieve the goals defined by the Supreme Commander-in-Chief. In his address to Russian citizens on the eve of the SVO, and in Ilyinsky's speech to the leadership of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This year, Russian troops liberated almost 4,500 square kilometers of territory occupied by the enemy. Neo-Nazis control less than 1% of the territory of the Luhansk People's Republic, and still 25 to 30% of the Donetsk People's Republic, Zaporozhye, and Kherson regions. The enemy's combat potential has been undermined. This year alone, the losses of the IFU exceeded 560,000 servicemen killed and wounded. And in total, the losses amounted to almost 1 million people for the entire time of its. Only in the Kursk adventure, the Kiev regime lost more than 40,000 soldiers. By this year, more than 58,000 units of various enemy weapons and equipment, including 18,000 of foreign production, have been destroyed in the Special Operations Zone. Russian high-precision weapons have caused significant damage to the military-industrial complex of Ukraine and the associated energy system. The enemy has largely lost the ability to produce the necessary weapons, equipment, and ammunition. This, in particular, is connected with the energetic efforts of the Kiev regime to drag Western producers literally into the territory of Ukraine. So far, however, without significant results. The armed forces of the Russian Federation firmly possess a strategic initiative on the entire line of combat contact. Currently, the average daily advance of troops has significantly accelerated and is about 30 square kilometers. The enemy is forced to go on the defensive and use the remaining reserves. The staffing of its units at the forefront does not exceed 45 to 50%. These successes are a great merit of soldiers and officers, generals of the United Group of Troops, personally commanders of groups of troops, and their military administration bodies, the General Staff. I would like to emphasize the high results in combat operations of a number of units of formations: the 1st Tank, 2nd, 5th, 8th, 29th, and 51st Combined Arms Armies, units of the 76th Airborne Assault, 98th and 106th Airborne Divisions, and, of course, 155th and 810th Marine Brigades. Taking into account the experience of the SVO, the Ministry of Defense faces a number of important tasks. The first is, first of all, to generalize and promptly introduce to all troops innovations in the tactics of warfare that have shown their effectiveness. To ensure the use of assault units by small mobile groups under the cover of rep means with simultaneous complex defeat of the enemy, including high-precision weapons. Automate the management of combat operations and increase information awareness of commanders and management bodies. To do this, it is necessary to create an integrated information environment for decision-making in the tactical link. There are elements of the development of such a system in all groupings and many parts compounds. But it is necessary to give this all a systematic character, instructing the main command of the ground forces to develop such a system and ensure the first stage of its implementation in the troops next year. Further, the most significant breakthrough in the tactics of the unit's actions was the mass use of unmanned aerial vehicles for various purposes. This is the fire defeat of the enemy, conducting reconnaissance and electronic warfare. Currently, our troops use more than 3,500 drones every day. And this figure is constantly growing. The Rubicon Center for Advanced Unmanned Technologies has been specially created for the preparation of WAV calculations, the development of techniques and methods of using drones, and the introduction of new weapons. It is necessary to focus efforts on improving the tactical and technical characteristics of unmanned aerial vehicles. In terms of increasing their range of use, autonomy, and interference protection. Next, today, a huge number of innovative technical developments are carried out directly in the troops, showing high results. Just recently, I was in the Vostok grouping, and there was a whole exhibition of such products that are produced by a maximum of several dozen units. And all of them have actually suffered with paid blood, and of course they need it all to be replicated in other compounds, too. And so it is not only in the East grouping, it is also in the North grouping, and in other groupings. For example, ground-based robotic complexes that carry out fire damage, reconnaissance, mining, ammunition delivery and evacuation of the wounded have proved to be effective during combat operations. Such combined arms inventors are constantly improving the characteristics of WAVs, communications equipment of the Russian Federation. All this allows us to save thousands of lives of our servicemen. In this regard, it is necessary to conduct a full inventory of such military developments, systematically conduct their field testing, and organize the serial production of the best samples. I instruct Deputy Defense Minister Alexei Krivoruk to organize this work. Further, to ensure the staffing of the combined group of troops at a level that ensures the guaranteed performance of combat missions. To this end, systematic work on the recruitment of the armed forces continues together with the regions. This year alone, over 427,000 contract servicemen have already been recruited. On average, more than 1,200 people sign a contract annually. It is important not to lose the dynamics of this process. I would like to note that an integral part of recruiting troops is the combat training of new contractors. It is necessary to introduce new methods of action and techniques that have shown high efficiency of the special operation, as well as synchronize the training of troops with the supply of the latest means of armed struggle. Of course, special attention should be paid to the provision of reserve regiments with almost all personnel, weapons, equipment, and ammunition. Further, to provide groups of troops with weapons and equipment to the extent of the combat tasks they solve. This year, compared with the 2022 year, the supply of new and modernized tanks has increased 7 times. Infantry, fighting vehicles, and armored personnel carriers 3 times, unmanned aerial vehicles delivered 23 times more. Artillery ammunition 22 times. With such volumes, there are practically no disruptions in the supply of particularly demanded types of ammunition, weapons, and equipment. Out of 260 positions, only 4 positions of products are delivered with delays. Nevertheless, in order to ensure the sustainability of the supply of weapons, equipment, and ammunition in the 2025 and 2026 years, it is necessary to take a number of additional measures. It is required during the current month, that is, December, to conclude contracts for the supply of 2026 year to the entire range of weapons, which has a production cycle of 12 to 16 months, and for the rest of the nomenclature, to conclude contracts no later than the beginning of the second quarter of next year. In accordance with the President's instructions, switch firm limit prices to a transparent price formula. Ensure the conclusion of long-term contracts for the supply of serial products at fixed prices. To complete, in accordance with the presidential decree, the introduction of a new flexible mechanism for the purchase of certain types of weapons and equipment within the framework of the State Defense Order. This will reduce the purchase period to 1 or 2 weeks instead of several months. We have to note that the adoption of bylaws under this presidential decree has been delayed. It is necessary to ensure their adoption by the end of this year. Next, modernize the logistics system, taking into account the OVO. As a matter of priority, it is necessary to ensure the protection of arsenals and fuel bases in the zone of reach of enemy weapons. Priority measures have already been taken in the shortest possible time. Open storage sites have been eliminated. Camouflage has been carried out, mobile fire groups have been created, and a system of interaction with air defense has been established. In the future, taking into account the impact of the enemy, It is necessary to reconsider approaches to the organization of storage bases and logistics. Large integrated storage bases should be replaced by a distributed, layered network of warehouses. Accordingly, the logistics system and methods of military cargo delivery will change. In terms of repair and restoration of equipment, additional repair units have been deployed near the front line as soon as possible this year. In addition to repairs, they are engaged in equipment, protective equipment. In total, more than 300 field brigades of industrial enterprises are involved in the combat areas. The measures taken made it possible to increase the level of serviceability of weapons and military equipment. However, there is still something to work on here. It is necessary to ensure that the serviceability is maintained at a level of at least 98%. This is a very ambitious goal, an ambitious figure, but Andrei Mikhailovich Baliga said that we are. It is achievable, and we will certainly cope with it. Next, in the beginning, there were many complaints about the quality of the volume of clothing pleasure. Although the most acute problems in this area have been resolved, a number of issues still require attention. Since 2022 year, the supply of personal belongings has been doubled. More than 1,400,000 sets of field uniforms and more than 500,000 sets of personal armor protection equipment were transferred to the group. However, there are still questions about the quality of the supplied equipment. In this regard, new items of field uniforms have been developed, which have previously been highly appreciated by the troops. They are characterized by increased strength, functionality, and compatibility with means of individual armor protection. It is necessary to complete the military tests of these samples and begin deliveries next year. It should be noted that we have a large number of sole suppliers in this area. This requires special attention to product quality, prices, and localization of production. Together with the FSB, a special commission has been set up to monitor compliance with these conditions. Further, to increase the capabilities of the air defense system to protect critical facilities and extremely important settlements. In general, the means of air defense in the course of its showed high efficiency. This year alone, 86 cruise missiles have been shot down in the direction of Shadow and Rocks. 215 Atticus ballistic missiles, 1,629 HIMARS rockets. More than 27,000 unmanned aerial vehicles of the aircraft type. It is worth noting the positive experience of creating an air defense system around Moscow. It should be taken into account when building similar systems in other Russian regions. Nevertheless, there are still many unresolved issues in this area. We will discuss them in detail in the closed part of the board. The second priority area is the modernization of the armed forces in the medium term, taking into account external threats and technology development. As you know, the United States has declared our country a source of immediate and constant threat. It is modernizing all components of the nuclear triad by the 2030th year. Updating the nomenclature of nuclear ammunition, creating new nuclear warheads and bombs. The buildup of combat capabilities of elements of the American global missile defense system continues. In November of this year, a US missile defense base was opened 165 kilometers from Russia, in the Polish Redzikowo, which allows, with minor modifications to its infrastructure, to use Tomahawk sea-based cruise missiles. NATO countries are switching to a new combat readiness system this year. It is planned to deploy a 100,000th group at the western borders of Russia within 10 days, by the end of 30 days. A 300,000th one, after 180 days, an 800,000th one. Further, in July of this year, Washington and Berlin officially announced the deployment of American medium-range missiles, up to 2,300 kilometers in Germany in the 26th year. And in the future, about the deployment of hypersonic missiles with a flight time to Moscow of about 8 minutes. To repel these threats, it is necessary to solve a number of tasks. The first is to introduce new approaches to the formation of the state armament program. We are talking about building a program based on the target appearance of the armed forces. taking into account the nature of future military conflicts. As you, Vladimir Vladimirovich, noted in your speech, first of all, it is the improvement of all three components of the nuclear deterrent forces. Next year, we will continue to re-equip the strategic missile forces with the YARS missile system. We will take 4 strategic missile carriers to 160M into the strategic aviation forces. The Prince Pozharsky strategic missile submarine has been included in the Navy. We will continue to improve weapons for conducting so-called contactless combat operations. Develop technologies for creating robotic complexes of air, land and sea-based and interference of protected control systems, based on artificial intelligence and technologies of world-machine interaction. Further, it is necessary to form a single information field. This requires the development of high-speed and secure communication channels, primarily space, as well as the formation of unified standards and protocols for data transmission of automated control systems. Further, increasing the effectiveness of defeating the enemy with high-precision weapons. It is necessary to introduce complexes with new qualitative characteristics in accuracy, noise immunity, and range. In the next 5 years. Next year, we need to scale up the production of the Oreshnikov medium-range missile system and continue working on other promising models. Taking into account the above, by the end of December of this year, we plan to determine the list and scope of the nomenclature of the state armament program, and at the beginning of next year, report the parameters of the future GIVI to the Supreme Commander-in-Chief. Second, create a system of advanced research, accelerated development and implementation of the latest weapons and equipment. First of all, it is necessary to revise the lists of research and experimental and consular works for each weapon system, taking into account the development of technologies. Next year, we will create a network of military experimental centers in the main scientific and technological areas. Such centers will have to carry out tests and approbation of samples in combat conditions of close interaction with industry, as well as provide training for specialists and the introduction of new products of the Army. It is necessary to establish a qualitatively new system of interaction with the civil scientific community, production laboratories. By analogy with the National Technology Initiative, launch a military technology initiative. Third, to ensure the construction of the armed forces in accordance with security threats. It is necessary to complete the formation of the Moscow and Leningrad military districts as a response to the expansion of NATO towards our borders, and in this regard, clarify the size of the armed forces. Further, to improve the organizational and staff structures of formations and military units as they enter service with advanced weapons systems. In accordance with the instructions of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, it is proposed to form a new branch of the armed forces, the Troops of Unmanned Systems. With your decision, we will complete their creation in the 3rd quarter of next year. Further, taking into account the increased role of space systems in ensuring combat operations, it is necessary to create scientific and technical centers for the development of navigation tools and countering threats in space. The 3rd priority area is the modernization of the system of military education and training of officers. Today, the Ministry of Defense includes 39 military educational institutions, including the Saratov Higher Artillery Command School, created this year. More than 12,000 officers are graduated annually. It is extremely important that, taking into account the predicted military conflicts, the armed forces' need for personnel is fully met. To do this, the following 4 interrelated tasks have to be solved. The first is to update the list and content of military accounting specialties and educational programs, promising weapons systems, and a fundamentally new nature of conducting future military operations. Require the presence of specialists in new military professions in the troops. Their training should be based on a scientifically based forecast of the armed forces' need for such specialists. The requirements for them should become the basis for changes in educational programs. The second is to modernize the system of military universities, including their material and technical base. First of all, it is necessary to re-equip universities with modern and promising weapons and military equipment. First of all, training complexes. To staff the teaching staff with officers who have proved themselves during the SFO. We will create new educational institutions for promising specialties. Build a system of partnerships between military educational institutions and leading civilian educational, scientific organizations, and industrial enterprises. Third, to form a system of continuous additional professional education of military personnel. It is necessary to create a system that will help each officer independently assess the achieved level of competence, efforts, motivation to acquire new knowledge, improve skills and abilities, and most importantly, ensure the availability of appropriate educational tools, including through special online educational courses and programs. And the fourth is to radically increase the prestige of military service. It is extremely important that the profession of an officer become one of the most prestigious in society. We will strengthen the authority and social status of the officer corps, revive the best traditions of the Russian and Soviet Army, the officers' code of honor, officer meetings, and form standards of moral and ethical qualities of an officer. The fourth priority area is medical support for military personnel and their family members. It should be noted that military medicine has withstood the tests of a special military operation with honor. This is indicated by the numbers. About 96% of military personnel can return to service after discharge from hospitals. And hospital mortality rates today are less than 0.5% and continue to decline. This is one of the best indicators in the world. The survival rates of the wounded have significantly increased due to the large-scale use of air medical evacuation, military sanitary trains, as well as the development of comprehensive medical rehabilitation. I want to thank all the medical workers who save our soldiers on the front line in district, central, military medical and civilian institutions. Special words of gratitude to the Ministry of Health and the Federal Medical and Biological Agency for the creation of an additional bed fund and assistance in the further treatment of wounded servicemen. However, much remains to be done. The first is to ensure an increase in the level of first aid. We are talking about tactical medicine and reducing the time of medical evacuation. Next year, it is necessary to focus on training military personnel in first aid skills during combat training. For this purpose, the specialists of the Center for Tactical Medicine of the Ministry of Defense have trained more than 7,000 instructors. It is necessary to complete the transition to modern means of providing first aid to military personnel, modified taking into account the experience of the SFO. We are talking about first aid kits of the 8th sample. Yes, equip medical units with modern means of protection for evacuation up to 100%. Now this indicator is at the level of 40%. I have to say, since my morning begins with familiarization with the provision of groups with various ammunition, military equipment, and so on, I can say that today this figure is 44%. It's still very small. Moreover, it is very much differentiated from the groupings. There are groups of which he makes up 75%, and there are less than 30. They are Nazis, they are not Nazis, they are hitting our ambulances, preventing the evacuation of the wounded, and so on. This is an important area, and we need to make every effort here, of course, to resolve all these issues. To expand the successful experience of using small-sized equipment, including robotic complexes, for the evacuation of the wounded. Secondly, to increase the staffing of military medical units with secondary and junior medical personnel from 95% to at least 98% next year. To do this, it is planned to provide additional financial incentives for medical specialists of these units. The third is to ensure the modernization of leading military medical organizations and increase the volume of high-tech assistance. It is required to complete the construction of 19 new hospitals equipped with the most modern equipment and complete major repairs in 10 military medical organizations with a total capacity of more than 3,000 beds. The fourth is to provide conditions for the rehabilitation of military personnel, increase accessibility, and reduce the time of prosthetics. This is especially true for the seriously wounded. To this end, the issue of construction of 7 new rehabilitation centers is being worked out, including by attracting extra budgetary sources. This will allow additional medical rehabilitation for more than 11,000 servicemen. Also, starting next year, the system of providing medical care to the participants of the SFO who received serious injuries that led to the amputation of limbs will be changed. The transition to new modern standards will be implemented, which will allow providing a full cycle of prosthetics and rehabilitation services. At the same time, military personnel will be able to receive them near their places of residence and service. Due to the new system, the waiting period for prosthetics should be reduced by half to an average of 3 months. Another important task is the socialization and employment of servicemen with severe injuries after prosthetics treatment. It is necessary to use their rich service and combat experience to work in military administration bodies, military commissariats, and universities. The fifth is to optimize the activities of military medical commissions. The organizational structure of military medical examination institutions has already been expanded. This year, 5 new departments have been formed in Lugansk, Donetsk, Volgograd, Voronezh, and Nizhny Novgorod. It is necessary to strengthen control over the commission, ensure compliance with deadlines, and the quality of decisions taken. This is especially important in light of the differentiation of payments for injuries. The fifth priority area is the social provision of servicemen and their family members. We are talking about the strict and most convenient receipt of cash payments, social benefits, and housing. A number of important steps have already been taken. Due to the transfer to digital format, the system of issuing a certificate of participation in the SFO has been radically simplified. The confirmation time has been reduced from 2 months to 5 days. First of all, we are talking about obtaining a certificate through the unified portal of public services. In less than 2 months, about 350,000 applicants have applied, and over 210,000 confirmations have already been issued automatically, thanks to the Ministry of Digital Development, the Ministry of Economic Development, and the Federal Tax Service, for their assistance in implementing this service for military personnel in the shortest possible time. However, these are only the first steps. What else needs to be done? Simplify and speed up the confirmation of rights to benefits and the receipt of benefits themselves by transferring services to a digital format, to ensure fair, targeted, and prompt payment of monetary remuneration for the active conduct of hostilities. In September of this year, these payments were increased by 1.5 times. But at the same time, there are a lot of complaints about their completeness and timeliness. These shortcomings must be eliminated as soon as possible. The third is to create a comprehensive system for searching for missing persons and supporting their family members. At the moment, this work has been carried out for too long and, frankly, with low efficiency. It is necessary to approach the search for our fighters comprehensively. It is necessary to streamline all processes, make changes to the regulatory framework, combine efforts with volunteers, ensuring their equipment and organization of work in the SFO zone. They are already working there, so we need to coordinate actions with them more clearly. It is necessary to provide additional support to the families of missing servicemen. This instruction was given by the President of the Russian Federation. The mechanism of payments to children of missing persons has been developed. The draft regulatory legal act has been sent to the government. Please speed up its adoption. In terms of housing provision for military personnel and their family members, as is known, there are 2 main forms of solving the housing issue of military personnel: the provision of an apartment or housing subsidy, and the provision of housing under the accumulative mortgage system. This year, more than 80 billion rubles have been allocated to provide housing subsidies to military personnel. As a result, about 4,000 servicemen received subsidies. At the same time, the queue for apartments and subsidies continues to be unacceptably large, over 48,000 servicemen. In this regard, the key goal of this area is to increase the availability of permanent housing and ensure a steady reduction in the queue for housing subsidies. We need to solve the following tasks. The first is to allocate additional funding this year. And next year, additional funding in the amount of 149 billion rubles for the provision of housing subsidies. This will significantly increase the rate of housing provision by almost half, up to 9,000 servicemen per year. At the same time, it is necessary to strictly observe the rights of military personnel in terms of priority. Secondly, to conduct an inventory of the housing stock, to put things in order in the accounting of housing, and to create a system of monitoring and control over its use. The third is to take measures to put into operation the objects of unfinished construction of housing stock. This is 32 objects and about 5,000 apartments, that is, well, in fact, the annual volume. How much we now give subsidies is readily above 80%, and there are 194 such objects in total. In the field of military mortgages, it is necessary to ensure the expansion of the possibility of purchasing housing, taking into account compensation for the increase in its cost. In the next 3 years, the number of participants in the accumulative mortgage system will more than double, to 800,000 military personnel. It is necessary to monitor the availability of financial resources and the timeliness of payments. And special attention should be paid to the possibility of purchasing apartments of the required area. A serviceman who has been in the system for 17 years, on average in the country next year, will be able to purchase more than 65 square meters, which exceeds the initial target. It is necessary to compensate for the rise in the cost of square meters in a timely manner to ensure the achieved level of accessibility. The sixth direction, the most important one, is the formation of a feedback system for military personnel and their family members. With the Ministry of Defense, this is a key area from the point of view of timely detection and response to systemic problems, primarily in terms of protecting the rights of military personnel. This year, the number of appeals received by the Ministry of Defense, compared with 2022 year, has more than doubled and exceeded 700,000. Today, the ministry has already started implementing a new approach. Its essence consists in the transition from working with appeals to solving the applicant's problems. The appeal is removed from control only after confirmation of the solution of the problem with the applicant himself, or if it is impossible to do it in principle. For the full implementation of this approach, the following tasks have to be solved. The first is to change the order of working with requests. Implement a digital system that will allow you to track the movement of each appeal from its submission to execution. Adopt regulations for the work of military command bodies with appeals at all stages. Provide for the applicant's assessment of the quality of the problem solution in the system. Next, create a system of motivation for officials who ensure compliance with deadlines and consideration of issues on the merits. Next, create a system for monitoring and analyzing the issues presented in the appeal, in order to identify and solve systemic problems, and to launch the full work of the Military Social Center. A separate task is to create a mechanism for processing information from war correspondents about problematic issues. Work has already begun this year. The ministry regularly holds meetings with war correspondents. As a result, specific instructions are given to the military authorities to resolve substantive issues. Between meetings, an exchange of information with military officers was organized to work out acute and urgent issues. This approach gives significant results, and we will continue this work. The seventh priority area is military technical cooperation. It should be noted that the attempts of the collective West to isolate Russia in terms of military cooperation have failed. This year it covered more than 100 countries. Enhanced cooperation with allies and strategic partners from the CIS, the Asia-Pacific region, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America, including 21 international exercises. Joint patrolling of the airspace was carried out. Cooperation in the field of military education is developing. Every year, about 9,000 students from more than 50 countries are trained in Russia. We share with key partners the Russian experience of conducting combat operations. More than 1,200 foreign servicemen participated in internships and consultations. At the same time, there is an obvious need to change approaches to the formation of priorities. International activities should be aimed at achieving the main goal, ensuring the security of Russia and its allies. In the new multipolar world, this work should be focused on achieving strategic results in the field of military and military technical cooperation. It is necessary to solve a number of tasks. The first is to ensure the creation of effective mechanisms for collective response to new security threats. To do this, use the potential of the STO, the CIS, and the Union State. Secondly, to put bilateral forms of military cooperation on a long-term and stable basis. We are talking about long-term planning and implementation of joint exercises and patrols, solving air defense tasks, exchanging intelligence data, and other practical formats. The third is to ensure the expansion of Russia's position in the global arms markets, including within the framework of industrial cooperation with our partners. The task is not only to increase the export of military products, which is not always possible, taking into account its own. It is necessary to move to stable cooperative ties between defense enterprises, including within the framework of licensed productions, with guarantees of purchases of manufactured military products by the armed forces of Russia and its partner. This is the kind of relationship that develops within the framework of the Union State with the Republic of Belarus. The eighth priority area is to increase the efficiency of the construction and property complex. In terms of construction, an inventory of more than 5,700 objects of unfinished construction has been carried out this year. The amount of financing required for their completion is about 690 billion rubles, which is 3 times higher than the annual volume of capital construction. Hence, the key goal of the construction complex is to ensure the rhythmic commissioning of priority facilities and eliminate the accumulated long-term construction by the 2030th year. What priority tasks should be solved? The first is to ensure the prioritization of objects under construction. We are building a lot of different things, and what really needs to be built in the first place, either we do not build at all, or we are building for a very long time. Priority should be given to facilities for the arrangement of locations of military units, facilities for the placement of weapons and military equipment, housing for military personnel in the hospital and rehabilitation centers. To make the transition to a new model of the military construction complex, we are talking about a clear division of powers and responsibilities between the levels of capital construction management, and a partial decentralization of capital construction management with the transfer of relevant powers and, I emphasize, resources to the military districts. It is planned to create appropriate military management bodies, as well as military construction units. Third, to carry out financial rehabilitation of supporting construction and design organizations. Of course, the Ministry of Defense needs its own powerful construction base to increase their production base into a part of the property complex. Currently, it includes more than 500,000 objects of real estate and land plots. Also, the Ministry of Defense is responsible for more than 800 organizations, including 88 companies in the commercial sector. The purpose of the work here is to establish order and subordination of the activities of the entire property complex to the tasks of the armed forces. What is planned to be done? The first is to conduct an inventory and create a real estate accounting system. Create a single integrated registry and digital platform of real estate, including digital passports of each object. This work is planned to be completed next year, and in the 26th year, the registration of all real estate will be completed. The second is to develop and implement a new system of corporate governance of subordinate organizations, including clear regulation of all procedures, the creation of a system of motivation of managers aimed at the final results, and the creation of a single treasury covering all subordinate organizations. The ninth priority area is the optimization of the internal processes of the Ministry of Defense. This refers to the introduction of so-called lean management approaches, which dramatically reduces the time and stages of administrative processes. As the first experience of conducting pilot projects in certain structural divisions of the ministry has shown, the reserves here are huge. The number of redundant procedures can be reduced by 5-10 times, and the terms by 5 or more times. The implementation of such approaches is carried out with the participation of Rosatom State Corporation, which has achieved well-known success in this area. Next year, we will have to create a permanent lean management mechanism. To do this, there are 4 tasks to be solved. The first is to create an organizational mechanism for implementing efficiency improvement processes, including a special structural subdivision of the Ministry, the Department for Improving Efficiency, which will be directly subordinate to the Minister of Defense. The second is to form a regulatory and methodological framework based on the experience of pilot projects. The third is to train military personnel and civilian personnel by optimizing internal processes. Fourth, create an appropriate motivation system. Currently, about 100 projects have been selected in 15 areas of activity of the Ministry of Defense, and their implementation will begin in the shortest possible time. And the 10th priority area is the creation of a unified digital environment of the Ministry of Defense. At the moment, the department has about 100 information systems that are poorly integrated with each other. Some of them are outdated and irrelevant. The goal is to create an integrated information system that meets the most modern technical requirements, ensuring decision-making in a non-provocative form. This year, together with the Ministry of Digital, Rostelcom and Rosatom, we conducted an audit of existing information systems and formed project management mechanisms. We are completing the definition of the target appearance of the future system. Next year, it is planned to develop and implement digital solutions for 37 of the most important basic processes. There are the following tasks: to form the image of an information system, functional and technical requirements; to develop a target architecture based on domestic software and hardware solutions; and to ensure the implementation of information systems for basic processes. In general, it is planned to complete the commissioning of the information system by the end of the 27th year. Dear Vladimir Vladimirovich, I would like to express my deep gratitude to you for your constant attention to the construction and development of the armed forces, providing social guarantees to servicemen and their families. I would also like to thank the Presidential Administration, the Federal Assembly and the government for their consolidated support of our work, and express my gratitude to my colleagues in the Power Unit for their joint work. And of course, I sincerely thank Sergei Shoigu for creating a powerful jam in the development of the armed forces. Comrade Commander-in-Chief, all the tasks you have set will be completed. We will ensure the progressive development of the Army and Navy, increase combat capabilities. We will discuss in detail the priority direction of the armed forces activities in the closed part of the meeting, colleagues. Thank you for your attention. Let me, according to tradition, just say a few words at the end of this part of your work. The minister spoke about the illegitimacy of the regime in Kiev, with which we are at war. I want to emphasize once again that we are not at war with the Ukrainian people, but with the regime, the neo-Nazi regime in Kiev, which seized this power back in 2014 year. This is the source of power, the coup d'etat. And so all the troubles of both Ukraine and Russia began just after this bloody state unconstitutional coup. It matters today because these people who are in power, they commit crimes against their people and against ours every day. This regime in general has lost, is losing, in any case, obviously, the signs of statehood. When we talk about illegitimacy, what do I mean? Didn't you go to the polls? We didn't go. Does the Constitution make it possible to extend the powers of the President? No. The Constitution makes it possible to extend the powers of only a representative authority. Glad. That's it. And the reference to martial law does not matter. There are no ways in the Constitution to extend the powers of the presidential power. And where is the Supreme Court? Where is the Constitutional Court? A legitimate question. The President of the Supreme Court is in prison. They just keep silent about it. No one talks about it. But he was put behind bars. The powers of the Supreme Court include, among other things, the cancellation of unauthorized decisions of the President. Several cancellations took place. After that, to jail. And the head of the regime immediately announced on the same day, he will sit. As you know, in all civilized countries, a person is guilty or innocent, whether he will sit or not, is determined only by the court. No, here a representative of administrative bodies, to say, will sit. This is the Supreme Court. There are also constitutional ones there. Do you know what happened to the Constitutional Court? The security stopped letting the chairman of the Constitutional Court to work. They just don't let me go to work. In the end, the Constitutional Court as a whole turned out to be paralyzed. And the chairman of the Constitutional Court himself went abroad, where, as far as we know, he is provided with state protection in his country of residence, since there is a threat to his life. Are these signs of statehood? No, these are just signs of the loss of statehood. Therefore, crimes are committed one after another. I think that lowering the mobilization age to 18 will also be another crime. This is exactly a crime, because reducing it to at least 14, as in Hitler's Germany. Creating a Hitler situation on the battlefield will not change it. This is clear to everyone. But I think that at the behest of those countries whose interests the Kiev regime protects, it does not protect the interests of the Ukrainian people. This is already obvious today. At the behest of those whose interests he serves and protects, they will go to reduce mobilization to 18 years old. And the boys will be driven to slaughter. Since today people are being caught on the street like stray dogs during forced mobilization, and they are being driven under a bullet today. It seems to me that the boys will be driven in the same way. And then these figures of this regime will simply flee abroad under the cover of those whose tasks they are performing today. That's it. Most likely it will be. Some figures of the previous, recent years have fled, are already sitting abroad, and are well known, and they feel good. Because they stole money from the Ukrainian people, picked their pockets, and all these pockets are also abroad, with those sponsors who keep them on this hook. Money was stolen, the accounts are their everything. And they dance, performing. They dance to any music, performing any tasks. It seems to me that this will continue until we achieve the goal of a special military operation. Now about. I would say that everything is fine with the mobilization in Ukraine. You know, I mentioned that in this sense, in terms of personnel. Last year, over 300,000 of our citizens, our men came to the military enlistment offices and signed contracts for service in the armed forces, over 300,000. This year, at the moment, there are already over 430,000. And this flow of volunteers does not stop. It is thanks to this attitude to the destinies of our country, to the destinies of our children, that what I said, and what the minister said is happening here. But in fact, this is a turning point on the line of contact. And our combat activity is an interception, a complete interception of the strategic initiative. Well, of course, that's not enough. Yes, by the way, when I spoke about these crimes, I mean not only crimes against the Ukrainian people, first of all against ours, including in the Kursk region and other border regions. Yes, of course, from a military point of view, you can't talk to anyone, everyone, both our and foreign experts believe, that this is an adventure in Kursk. That's what they say, the Kursk adventure. This is obvious, because there is no sense in the fact that the Kiev regime is being done in the border regions. But from the point of view of crimes against the peoples of Russia, this is an obvious thing, this is a crime. This is especially true of the suffering of the civilian population. And here, of course, the sacred duty of the armed forces is to throw the enemy out of our territory. The task of the military justice bodies is to record all these crimes, especially against the civilian population. And the task of special services is to find and punish criminals. Now, as for how much money we spend and what it translates into, an extremely important thing, of course. An extremely important thing. The minister said, we spend 3, 6 and 0.3% of GDP on the military component, on improving and strengthening defense capability. This is decent money, it's about 2.5% higher than we spent before. But these are not, oddly enough, the biggest expenses in the world, even among countries that do not have any armed conflicts. But nevertheless, this is a lot of money. And here we need to use it very rationally, ensuring, first of all, social guarantees for our servicemen, the effective operation of the military-industrial complex, but also, very importantly, the rational use of what the armed forces are given by the side. And this applies to the social sphere, this applies to equipment and weapons. It is very important to receive everything in a timely manner, competently evaluate what comes in, and be able to use it, and to train personnel, to train people who know how to do it competently and effectively. There are a lot of tasks here. In general, they also decide what happens in the people's agro-industrial complex, as we are saying now, in what happens right on the line of contact. But we also need to set up our entire military organization for such joint work to achieve the final result. That, yes, now in this regard, and the latest types of weapons, including those that are heard both here and abroad. First of all, I mean medium-range weapons. Well, you all remember well, you know that the Soviet Union went to the elimination of medium-range ground-based missiles, and the Americans also did with their Pershing. But the Americans, in addition to land-based medium-range missiles, had the same sea-based and air-based missile systems. But the Soviet Union did not have them. Therefore, to a certain extent, we have gone for unilateral disarmament. The potential enemy left these systems at sea and in the air, and we didn't get anything at all. But nowadays, in the Russian Federation, we have created a much more modern sea-based complex than in the USA. These are Calibris, these are Zircon hypersonic complexes. They have created the latest medium-range air-based missiles Ha-101, with a range that is a multiple of what the probable enemy has, over 4,000 kilometers. And this system can also be equipped with a special warhead, that is, a nuclear one. But finally, here is a well-proven Hazel complex, very powerful. I want to repeat it again, the experts know this. The commander of the strategic missile forces is here, he thinks so and told me about it. With complex use, with the group use of several complexes at once at the same time. This is comparable to the use of nuclear weapons, but it is not nuclear, because there is no nuclear fuel. Nuclear component, there is no contamination. And this is a very significant element in modern decision-making, which means of armed struggle we can use. But we must pay the most careful attention to what is happening in other countries, what is entering service, or may enter service in the near future, in other leading military countries. In this way, as we have done so far, we need to act absolutely in the near future and in the medium term. Once again, I will return to what was just said. We spend 6 3/10% of GDP on increasing the strengthening of defense capability. In order for all the components in the country, all the components of the life of the state, the economy, the social sphere in the broadest sense of the word, science, education, healthcare to develop, we cannot swing indefinitely. Increase these costs indefinitely. I say this so that we all understand that the state, the Russian people, gives everything they can to the armed forces to fulfill the tasks that we face. And our task is to ensure the safety of the Russian people, to ensure the safety of our people and the future of Russia. I really hope that the pace that has been gained in recent months on the line of contact will be maintained. I want to thank you for your service and wish you all the best. Thank you very much.